So over to you now, Chair. The meeting's live.
Good evening and welcome to the first online RBKC Family Services Select Committee. We hope everyone will be patient. We're trying our best. It is our first time, and it's the first time in the country that there's been a full Family Services Select Committee online. So we have our technical support there to help us, and we will all try our best and we'll work together to make this a productive meeting. I'm Councillor Janet Evans, the Select Committee Chair, and I would like to, I'd like to welcome all of you here, and I'd like to welcome the committee. We have some new members. They will introduce themselves, and we have a new lead member, Josh Rendell. I really would like to commend the council on the hard work that everyone has done getting through this crisis, and the officers for helping us putting things together for the community, and for the councillors and in helping us get this meeting together. In line with government guidance, everyone at home, as much as possible, is being held. This meeting is being held via Microsoft Teams live conferencing. All the committee members, the council officers, and the parties who wish to participate in this hearing are joining from remote locations. We will go through the minutes. We will then go through the report. Each time we will allow questions that are relevant to what is being presented, and the committee members will speak first, then any members of the public who have registered a question. We would now have the 72 seconds of silence in remembrance of the people who perished in the Grenfell fire. Our hearts and our minds are always with them. Thank you very much. I would also like to make a statement about the hard times that we have been going through, how we have come through this together, and make a commitment to the community that we will always be conscious of the situation with COVID-19, look at what has been happening in the community, the provision, and be ready for if there is another peak. And also to make a commitment about what has recently happened with George Floyd and many, many others. Our committee is here to deliver, and to deliver a fair and quality education and services for the community. And you have my commitment and the committee's commitment that we will try as hard as we can to live up to that. Please feel free as the community to let us know what your thoughts are, and send us questions, stay involved with our committee, and we look forward to hearing from you. It's very important to us. I would ask that the members of the committee, keep their mics off and only put them on when they're ready to speak. Otherwise, because of the bandwidth, it would be very difficult to get a quality broadcast.
Melissa.
Okay. Please state your name before you speak so that we know who you are and who you represent, and that would be very helpful to us. If your connection drops and you miss something, please can you let us know? In the event that my connection drops, Councillor Hamish Adorian is the vice chair and he will take over. I can confirm that I have no declarations, and I am a councillor. I am chair of the committee, Janet Evans, and I'm councillor for Courtfield Ward. I would now like to go around and have, in the interest of time, that we declare who we are and whether or not we have any interest, so we can do it all at the same time. Councillor Hamish Adorian.
Hello, good evening. My name is Hamish Adorian. I'm a councillor for Hull Sports Board and for declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Nadia Nail, have you made it in?
We're still having a bit of trouble getting her in, but now Tom's going to give a go at ringing her and trying to get her in.
Okay. When she's in, please let us know and then she can declare herself, okay?
Sure, will do.
Councillor Julie Mills?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Julie Mills, Norland Ward, no declarations of interest, no conflicts.
Thank you. Councillor Charles Williams?
Yes, Councillor Charles Williams, Redcliffe Ward. I have no interest to declare.
Councillor Maxwell Woodger?
Hi, yes, Councillor Maxwell Woodger for Queensgate Ward. I have no declarations or interests.
Excellent. Councillor Judith Blakeman?
Judith Blakeman, Nottingdale Ward, nothing to declare.
Excellent. Now the co-opted voting members, can you introduce yourselves? Father Samuel McNally Cross.
Father Samuel McNally Cross, co-opted member representing the London Diocese Board of Schools. No declarations of interest.
Thank you. Karen Wyatt.
Hello, Karen Wyatt, representing Diocese of Westminster, Catholic Diocese of Westminster. No interest to declare.
Excellent. Richard Derecky.
Richard Derecky, I'm co-opted governor for parent governor, and I don't have any declarations of interest to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Estela Gomez.
Estela Gomez, co-opted member for parent governors. No declaration of interest.
Thank you. Now we'll go on to co-opted non-voting members for the term of this council. Kathleen Williams. Any apologies or anything?
No, I haven't got anything for Kathleen, sorry.
Okay, maybe she's late then. Please make a note of it. And as well about Councillor Nall. And Melissa Hind. Okay, please make a note of that. Okay, I'd like to ask the committee to note that the membership, the chair and the vice chair agreed at the annual meeting of the council on the 20th of May. Agreed? So we have no apologies for absence, but I think we have to make a note who hasn't come in yet and then amend the note when they come into the meeting and at what time, please. Now, the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of December, 2019. Can we agree them? Can you turn on your mic and say whether we can all agree them?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Good, thank you very much.
Agreed.
Now I think we will go into A5, the childcare needs of the. Yes, did I
Can I
skip?
ask a question about the minutes?
Sorry?
Can I ask a question about the minutes?
You may.
On page 6, it says that the Safeguarding Children's annual report says further analysis would be required to explain an increase in the number of unexpected deaths. And I just wanted to know, is it happening or not?
As I said, Judith, I think that is something, that is a question that I would like you to ask when the officers are present at the end of the meeting. Then you can get a specific answer to your question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay?
Yep.
I did. Thank you. A5, childcare needs of the communities affected by the Grenfell tragedy, the working group report. This will start with Councillor Hamish Adorian, who is the working group lead, and he will introduce the report. And Hamish, can you also mention who your committee is?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair. Just making sure my sound is on. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair. Yes, we have recently commemorated the 3rd anniversary of the Grenfell Tower tragedy, and I think it's important, first of all, we recognise the continuing effects of that event on many families in the community, and particularly young children who, regardless of their age at the time, experience the aftermath of traumatic events like this in complex ways. And 3 years really is no time at all. This topic of childcare provision for families in the communities affected by the Grenfell tragedy was originally suggested by residents, and we took this up aiming to understand better the existing provision of childcare for under 5s in the North Kensington area and see how best this could be improved, particularly to make sure we are delivering on the needs of the affected community. We ran a drop-in session for parents and carers. We called for written testimonies from parents about their childcare experiences. We spoke to officers in the Family and Children's Services Department, read relevant background reports, and I'd also note that many of those background reports are included in the A5 agenda. We also visited the current sites of the Grenfell Nursery and the Illis Booker Stay and Play Centre as well. And I'm pretty sure there is more we could do to raise the amount of direct engagement with parents. And if we choose to continue this working group in some form, I'd certainly be keen to hear from more parents to understand how best we could be supporting their family aspirations. We deliberated extensively on our findings in order to reach the set of recommendations published thus far. One of the areas I'd note are children's centres and schools, which are both sites which in principle could be extended to offer childcare provision for under 5s in Nottingdale and the surrounding areas. For schools in particular, this is often not straightforward and could actually result in financial loss and is therefore not sustainable for them, particularly if they want to offer affordable rates. As we've noted in our report, we believe the council should work, first of all, with the Grenfell Nursery and other mainstream schools and indeed other community providers in the area to see whether we can assist them to offer childcare services beyond school core hours and the school core terms, essentially in line with the provision that many private providers would offer. And the council could also perhaps explore the possibility of offering a standardized contract or some kind of package to schools so they can fundraise in a sustainable way to offer these after school places to under 5s, again, which will help working parents with their childcare needs. The other issue is eligibility for many of these government-funded childcare places for 2 to 4 year olds. A lot of parents seem to fall through the various gaps in the schemes, and as a result, essentially suffer a shortfall in provision. Now, while we acknowledge that these requirements and indeed the funding are from central government, we would encourage the council to try and find ways of assisting working parents in the affected communities who are unable to meet these threshold requirements. Another important kind of contributor to the mix of childcare provision are childminders, and we'd recommend the council reach out to them to see how we can improve communication or indeed provide support to them when they want to carry out their administration tasks for offering the government's extended entitlement for 3 and 4-year-olds. Perhaps some kind of scheme could actually encourage those who want to work as childminders to take that up. An important factor that links in with that are stay and play centres, which are used by childminders. And so in that regard, we'd certainly like to see the council help the Illis Booker Stay and Play Centre find a suitable long-term location in the local area to the Lancaster West Estate. Now, it's true clearly that some of these recommendations would necessitate additional expenditure, but of course expenditure is guided by priorities, and notwithstanding the coronavirus crisis, Grenfell recovery continues to remain the council's #1 priority. We also recognise the recommendations are quite broad in scope. There may certainly be different ways of addressing each area. We obviously also acknowledge the work that the Family and Children's Services Department have already been doing, and we'd like to continue conversations with them over the course of the council year. If the chair agrees, we could indeed revisit these recommendations in 6 months and in 1 year to see what progress has been made in each area. And in the meantime, I believe certainly that there's a strong case in continuing this area of investigation in a new working group, and I look forward to discussing with that when appropriate. To conclude then, I'd like to thank my fellow working group members, Estella Gomez and Kathleen Williams. I hope Kathleen will be able to join us later. And actually, in particular, I'd like to acknowledge Kathleen's important contributions, particularly as a local head teacher in the affected area. This really shows the immense value of Co-op Fees, and I'd like to see whether we can bring in additional community expertise in future working groups. And thank you also to Paula Portas for all her work and assistance throughout. But also I greatly welcome the renewed participation of our Labour colleagues in the scrutiny process, particularly as representatives of the affected area. Their knowledge and their insights is going to be invaluable and was sorely missed. Though there is still more we can do, I trust these recommendations will be a positive contribution to the continued work of Grenfell recovery, and I commend this report to the committee. Thank you, Chair.
Hello?
Hello?
Hi there. Thank you very much, Hamish, Councillor Durian, and your committee. It was a very interesting report. It does leave a lot of room for further work. I was very interested in what you said about involving the mothers, perhaps in having them become trained to be childminders. That would be a very proactive program. I think that could work very nicely. I wanted to ask you, maybe, I don't know if you got a chance to see this, but what is the food provision at the Grenfell Nursery? Do the people bring their own snacks? Are they given snacks? And food is very important for children's learning.
Sorry, Janet, I missed a part of your question there. Which area were you referring to? Food provision, where?
At the Grenfell daycare, because the sessions are, what, 2 hours, 2.5 hours?
Mm-hmm. There was a kitchen there when we did the visit. There is a kitchen.
I see. So
well, a small one, so certainly I think they have aspirations to improve on that. Yes.
I see. So do people bring their own food and milk, or it's given out at the session, or how does that work?
I don't recall that exactly, to be quite honest.
Oh, okay.
I think there is some provision there. There's some provision.
Right. Okay, and I also liked your recommendation for extending it to after school. It's very important. Also,
that will particularly help working parents, and it was something that came across quite strongly. If we could improve that kind of provision in an affordable way, I think that's really the real crux of it. Can it be done in a way that's actually affordable to parents in the community? Because there is some provision in the area, but that's probably kind of out of bounds of the people that we're talking about in this report.
Okay, now can you tell me also, were there any fathers involved? Were there any single fathers who were in charge of the child rearing or stay-at-home fathers? Or was it purely women?
I think that's certainly an area where we'd like to hear more from parents directly, because I think that we did try and do a lot of outreach, but as always with a lot of these engagement processes, as much as you try to publicize everything, the actual numbers that came back were relatively low. So I'm certainly keen to kind of renew that and see if we can get more engagement from all kinds of families to get a better understanding of some of the unique challenges, because there are always unique challenges that don't come across until you hear about them. So if we do continue this working group, I think talking with parents directly, possibly more drop-in sessions in a number of settings in the area would definitely be useful.
Yes. Now I see Councillor Wade would like to ask a question. Councillor Wade, are you there?
Yes, Hamish, when you were looking at this provision, given the fact that we're going to be, perhaps you're going to be working from home, or they're going to be additional demands, how robust did you feel the system would be?
I think given the new normal that we are in, we are going to, may possibly as part of a new working, have to revisit some of these areas to see what is it that parents want. Obviously, we have to look at the kinds of employment options or the current types of employment of people in the area, see whether the childcare needs match that. I'm not sure whether we have figures yet as to how many people in the area will necessarily be working from home. And I think that's probably a topic for possibly a different working group in terms of what the response will be to COVID-19 and provision for family and services. It would be great to hear from the lead member later to find out what the plans are.
Thank you.
I see we have Judith Blakeman would like to ask a question. Judith, you say you have your hand up, but I don't see it.
Yeah, well, my hand was up. I'll take it down. I don't quite know. Otherwise,
now I see it. It was hard because your camera was off. It's better to keep when your camera's on. I could see your hand better, and I see who's doing that. So thank you for doing that properly now.
I've got quite a few questions, but can I first of all say that although she died in 1968, Iris Booker didn't like her name being called Illis. It's Ilis. Sorry, Hamish.
Thank you for that.
No, I've got a number of questions. First of all, I wondered who was the resident representative on this working group, because when we had the new scrutiny system, we were told that working groups would all have a local resident representative on it.
Well, this working group was myself and the two statutory co-optees. There's no reason why that can't change in future. I'm certainly be welcoming if there's a resident who would like to participate and bring their knowledge to the working groups. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, no, we should be advertising because the new scrutiny systems, a resident on every working group, and it doesn't seem to be happening yet. But that was the excuse for having scrutiny meetings only once every quarter instead of once every 2 months.
Could I add something to this? I think that you're quite right, and it would have helped if you led your residents, because if you had come to the meetings, then your residents would follow. But since you were boycotting us, perhaps that they were doing that as well. So now that you're here, I'm sure we'll get many more residents because you're a leader in your community. So thank you for bringing that up. It's very important.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was boycotting it as a member of the Labour group. Residents were certainly not boycotting.
Thank you very much. Can we go on to the next question? The next question, please.
Yeah, I've got lots of questions.
As long as it's relevant.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned. Well, you asked about fathers. I do know of single fathers who are raising families who have a very concerned interest in this. The problem was that the consultation didn't get out to many people. On the recommendations, I thought 1C on page 3 had already been done. I wanted to know what recommendation 5A meant by overcoming challenges and incentives that may sometimes hinder contacts between childcare providers in North Kensington. The appendix, the briefings, it keeps saying that Thomas Jones is in Norland Ward. It isn't. It's in Nottingdale Ward.
Confirm that.
Yeah, there's also there's a point on page 4 of the briefing about walking times. I would like to tell you that it takes far more than 15 minutes to walk from Lancaster West to Dalgarno with small children. It takes me 15 minutes at a brisk pace and without children.
Excuse me, Judith, wouldn't most of the people have their children in a buggy at that age? I think it makes much more sense.
It depends how many children you've got. It depends how many children you've got to take to school. I mean, most parents have more than one child and they have to take them all over the place. I mean, 15 minutes is the standard time for an adult.
Right. Where's your question, Judith?
My questions, well, I asked a question about recommendation 5A.
Yeah.
What does it mean by overcoming challenges and incentives that may sometimes hinder contacts between childcare providers in North Kensington?
I mean, that's not really sorry, do you want to ask anything else, Julie? Yeah, that
sorry,
recommendation. Sorry, yeah. It's not so much specific to North Kensington, but it's more about, at the end of the day, schools have to, you have to, speaking as a school governor myself, I do realise that schools need to compete for children, for teachers, for resources, and sometimes it's not immediately obvious that schools can try to collaborate in some areas. It's not always easy to do that. So finding ways of overcoming those kinds of challenges, I think, would really go along.
Okay, yeah, I'd like to ask about paragraph 2.4 on page 2. There is
okay, this is your last question, Judith, because I have other people waiting. Thank you very much.
So there is a reference to comparisons of fee levels with neighbouring boroughs, but we don't know what the fee levels are in other neighbouring boroughs. And I'm sorry you're going to cut me off, which is a pity, because I thought we were here to scrutinise, not to just be allowed 2 questions.
Well, you've already made about 4, so can you please get to the point now?
Yeah, I've just asked a question. Why is there no table of comparisons of fees with other boroughs?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Judith. That's something we could definitely try and include in the next version of this report.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, yes. I've got other questions, but I'll leave them.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, because we'd like to get to other
scrutiny.
Yeah.
We'd like to get to other committees, other committee members. Thank you.
It explains why we're so dubious about your whole scrutiny system. Not allowed to ask questions.
I think you've done very well, but you can ask it at the end if there's time. We'd really welcome it. And we welcome that you're back on the committee because you're very helpful being from the community. So thank you very much. Councillor Mills, you have your hand up.
Thanks. Hamish, Councillor Duran, I was a bit perturbed by this report because I would expect that the council and officers and indeed the leadership team would have put all of these recommendations in place 3 years ago. Grenfell was in 2017. The community has been traumatized since then. What surprised me was the use of the word should in virtually every single recommendation, meaning to say to me, and it may just be my misinterpretation, that in fact these services are not in place. So the question is, are they in place? And if they're not, why not?
Well, I think many of these recommendations are ways we can improve on childcare provisions in the area. And obviously it's for the lead member to report on what they have put in place. But certainly there are many areas where we can make improvements. And a lot of these recommendations will benefit not just those immediately affected by the Grenfell tragedy, but of course by the wider community.
If I may ask a follow-up question, Chairman. I mean, if you were to look at
theme 6, can you hear me, Hamish?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, if you were to look at theme 6, I mean, I take the point that it's an overall paper on childcare, but things like fostering communications with the community, communicating with primary schools about childcare, they seem not to be in place if that is the way that I should be reading, and indeed everybody else should be reading the report. So the question is really to bottom this out with granularity. Are these systems, which are meant to be statutory, certainly were put in place by Goal Command? Why are they not in place, or is it that they're not properly in place?
Just on that point about communication with schools, they, as far as we found out during our work, they are in place. There is regular communication, but we often found instances where schools weren't simply aware of a particular funding opportunity or a particular scheme, and they said, oh, they weren't really aware that the council indeed had such provision. It's one of those areas where you can always make improvements.
Well, if I may suggest, then, this working group needs to stay on, as you have said, Councillor, because these recommendations are absolutely fundamental to any grant for recovery, and we must ensure, if we're to be scrutinising properly, that in certainly not 6 months, but really within the new purview of the present new lead member, that these recommendations are, I should think, pretty much put in place immediately. Would be my suggestion to the committee.
Okay, well, since I take on board what you say, Julie, and I also take on board Judith's valuable contributions, I think when we're going now to the recommendations, we can make a suggestion to the officers after we approve or don't approve the recommendations. I think, Judith, if you could articulate what you would like to see in terms of a comparison, we can put that in and we can request it of the lead member. And Julie, if you could target your question, and then we can add that to this report and we can present it to the lead member. Okay, so let's go through the points. If we agree, key point 1, supporting children's provision. Do we all agree?
Agreed.
Yes.
Agree. Key 2, supporting parents with childcare costs. Do we agree on that to be included?
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Okay. Key theme 3. You all have these on your screens or in your notes. Do we approve? We agree?
Agreed.
Great.
Agree. Key theme 4, after school provision. Do we agree?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Great.
Okay. Key theme 5, fostering communications, very important. Do we agree?
Agreed.
Great.
And key theme 6, early years outreach.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay. Now I'd like to call on Judith Blakeman to add to make a recommendation that we can submit to the leader and that can be answered. Can you do that, Judith, please?
Sorry, what are you asking me to do?
Well, you asked a question and I said that we would bring it up at the appropriate time, which is now. So I would like you to add it as an amendment to what we are going into to this report that we are going to submit to the leader and his officers. So you wanted a comparison of our borough with the costs in other boroughs. So I would imagine you mean Westminster or Hammersmith. How many boroughs would you like a comparison of?
Well, I'd like to see comparisons with Westminster, Hammersmith and Fulham, Wandsworth, Camden, all the neighbouring boroughs, Brent. I've also put 2 more questions in the chat.
Right. Well, can we first focus on this and let's see what is practical. So you'd like to see the costs involved in those boroughs. Is that what you're saying? Could you please phrase it so we can use the Blakeman amendment?
The report says that comparisons were considered. I'd like to see what those comparisons were.
Okay. So the officers will either put that when we get to the lead member and his officers, we'll either answer that or we will add it here that you would like to see a comparison, okay? So that it will be covered one way or the other. Thank you. And Councillor Mills, would you like to add an amendment that you would like here?
I mean, just as a point of process, I didn't realise that at scrutiny meetings you could make recommendations to a working group paper. That is not my normal experience because, of course, there's been consultation, no discussion. But if that's the way it's to work, that's fine. I think I sent in my earlier questions, which are mostly budget related. And I think I've said here that officers should have had these provisions in place, and to my mind, quite a long time ago. So I suppose the question is, if not, why not? Can we see which ones they're going to recommend? And can we know the cost in relation to the other questions I've submitted, Chairman, the cost of these programmes?
Thank you. Noted. Jackie, do you have...
to the process where members of a committee can solely give recommendations at a scrutiny committee on a working paper in which they have not participated? I'm unfamiliar with that. It's a question.
Well, that's not exactly what's happening, Julie. We are agreeing the recommendations made by the working group. And if we have any queries or we'd like to see something in addition, we can answer to that. And I think that's really open scrutiny. But thank you for pointing that out. I think the whole point is we're trying to move ahead with scrutiny, open it up to the community, and not look backwards on what scrutiny was in the past. But thank you for pointing that out, Julie. Okay, so these have been agreed. Jackie, you've made a note of these?
Yes. Do you want me to clarify on working groups, Chair?
Yes, please.
So the working group is making a report to the committee, and the committee can accept and amend the report. Following this meeting, it's referred to the lead member with any amendments, and he has a statutory duty to respond to the report within 3 months. So that response should indicate whether the recommendations have been accepted or rejected, or if there's further work required. If any recommendations are rejected by the lead member, there has to be a substantive reason for why that can't happen.
Right. Well, thank you very much. And I am very pleased that everyone could participate. Councillor Blakeman, Councillor Mills, thank you for your contributions. They're very helpful. We will now move on to the School Exclusions Working Group report. This is led by Councillor Greg Hammond.
Sorry, are you not going to invite questions from the members of the public?
So I don't think we had any presented, am I correct?
Or from other councillors?
Are there any other councillors who'd like to ask a question? I don't see it on here. It's supposed to go through the chat room. We don't have any.
No.
We had Councillor Wade. No, we haven't had any. But thank you for pointing that out, absolutely. I have one comment from Councillor Atkinson, but it's not a question, so thank you. Okay, we are now going on to School Exclusions Working Group. I invite Councillor Hammond and his committee, his working group committee, sorry, to make their presentation.
Thanks very much indeed, Madam Chairman. And first of all, I'd like to thank the other members of the working group that were with me during the period January to March. So Richard Durecki and Karen Wyatt, who were with me from the beginning, and Linda Wade, who joined halfway through in February. It was a great pleasure working with all three of you during this the period we worked together. I'd also like to thank the officers for supporting us. And I say we had nothing but positive support from the Family and Children's Services Department throughout the time we were working on this. But if I single out one person, I'd like to single out Paul Laportas, who really did an excellent job of supporting us as our scrutiny officer, firstly in putting together our evidence day on the 4th of March, which I'll come on to in a moment, And secondly, on the drafting of the report, I gave her a really hard time on that, as I always do with drafting, but her analysis in the first draft was fantastic. And any further errors that come up in the report are now my responsibility. But thank you to Paula and thank you to all the other officers. The report is printed in for those with the printed documents, it's 31 pages. Page 29 is meant to be blank. That's just the way the printing's come out. And it's followed in the printed documents by an informational report that was given to the working group members back in January by the officers as one of our first sessions to read through and ask questions on. So we were allocated the period January through to March this year to do this working group, and in fact we did finish the planned evidence gathering before we were locked down. There was one other bit of evidence that we would have wished to do, which I'll come on to in a moment, that we didn't do. But we started this with a document review, and we were looking at national documents to start with. So the two particularly influential ones that we looked at were the Timpson review of school exclusions, which was headed up by Edward Timpson, who has been an education minister, and I think he's back as a minister now. But while he was out of Parliament, he led this national level review of school exclusions, which was a very well received report. And then secondly, the other one I think we were very influenced by was the House of Commons Education Select Committee report on alternative provision from a couple of years ago. So both of those reports set a national picture. But then looking down and drilling down into the local picture in Kensington and Chelsea, we had the statistical brief from the council officers, which is the one that's reproduced in the printed order paper behind the working group report. And everybody who's got access to that, either online or in print, can read through that at your leisure. So having done this document review and discussed it as a working group, we then in the fairly short time available, arranged visits. So we had a visit to an example primary school, an example secondary school, and the Latimer site of the Triborough Alternative Provision Academy. We set out a call for evidence as well. And on the 4th of March, we had a full day responding to that call or listening to the people that have responded from the call to the call for evidence. So in the morning, we had a roundtable discussion with academics, third sector organisations and community organisations, which was an extremely full and rich and interesting morning. And in the afternoon, we met a number of parents who'd come forward to share their experiences of exclusion. So in that 3-month period, it was a very short period, and this is a very big subject. So it wasn't enough time to develop substantive recommendations for immediate action. And I think, but it has provided a good evidence base of initial findings, which we put in the report, and recommendations for targeted further work, which is more narrowly focused than what we did, and will hopefully have some better some effects and positive effect a little bit further down the line. I'm not going to go through the report page by page, but I would turn to the recommendations, which are on pages 30 and 31, just to situate those, because I think that's where we may well need to focus. And the recommendations fall into two broad categories, and each one of these is an area that deserves further work. But the two categories are those which examine how much more can be done within mainstream schools before the bar is crossed to formal exclusion, and I think that sort of leads into recommendation 1, and that's really important. We were really struck by the effect of exclusion on the individual pupils that are affected by it, and their families, and quite what a negative effect it has on them. And while we do understand that exclusion is the system, and sometimes it's necessary for the greater good of the school, it's for the greater good of the class teachers, and upholding the school's discipline, it does have an enormous effect. And we were quite struck by the Scottish system. We understand that in Scotland, most exclusion is done within the schools themselves, and they don't have an external exclusion system in the way that we do in England. And while all of our schools do have an internal exclusion system, the bar for moving from that to an external exclusion, whether it be a temporary or a permanent, is much lower than it is in Scotland. And our thought is that what needs more work, and this is recommendation 1, is to examine how we can raise that bar so more exclusion can take place internally within the schools and less of it externally in the TBAP. And the TBAP themselves, the Alternative Provision Academy, have got a lot of expertise on this, and we're wondering whether we can join up the dots there and bring their expertise out into the secondary schools to see what more can be done. But to do that requires a deeper examination of the secondary schools. We only visited one. There are 6 in the borough. All 6 of them have different exclusion policies, which is right because one size doesn't fit all. But really, to examine this properly, we need to look at all 6 schools and see where what more can be done in them, how the Alternative Provision Academy can help with that. So that's broadly, and I think where we are recommending that the next working group focuses. It's quite a narrowly focused bit of work because there's only a finite amount of time in a year, and this is because of the lockdown only going to be half a council year again. So this is what I would be suggesting for the working group to do for the next session. I think the other point to add into that is looking at vocational pathways, because a lot of the students who are excluded appear to respond quite well to the vocational training that's offered at Latimer, but vocational is not something that's offered to any great extent in the mainstream schools. So what more can be done along those lines? So there's a lot to explore there. There's a lot of questions to ask, but I think they could lead in a very productive direction. And so that's the first recommendation, and it's also the first theme. The second theme is what can be done to address the issues that cause students to struggle and to be excluded in the first place. And that is most of the other recommendations apart from number 6. And these are the ones that we're suggesting that the lead member goes away and studies for the next few months. We gave 6 months in most cases, and come back to the committee with some thoughts and recommendations. And these could be the subjects for future working groups. But for example, special education needs, just because my eye's gone to the second page first of all, but special education needs, there's a much greater incidence of exclusion amongst students who have special education needs than amongst those that don't. So we've made a number of thoughts on that, and we'd like to suggest that that's examined in more detail. This is a national picture, by the way. It's not unique to RBKC, but we're reflecting the national picture. Rather similarly, on the ethnicity point, there's black boys are much more prone to being excluded than many other ethnicities, and that's both African background and Caribbean in RBKC. The national picture actually has quite a difference between the two groups, between the African and the Caribbean. In RBKC, it seems to be much closer. Nationally, the other ethnicity that appears very highly up on the excluded list are the Gypsy traveller groups, but the absolute numbers of those in RBKC are so low that you can't make any statistical conclusions out of that. But that whole diversity element is something that we're suggesting that the council responds to. We were also having a look at the benefits of having family support workers based in schools. and we certainly heard some benefits of this, and we'd like to hear some more analysis of this by the council executive. As we think there's some positive benefits that can come out of this, but possibly some resource implications as well. And similarly with the early help side, and I'm not going to read through all the recommendations because it's broadly similar. And the other one for the lead member, in fact, two others for the lead member, digital tracking is very important. There is a certain element of digital tracking so that there's a digital record with each student that follows them right from early years to the end of school, but it doesn't seem to be very effective. And we certainly heard evidence that students' reports were not available when students turned up at a new school, whether it be on transition from primary to secondary, or on a managed move, or from one secondary to another, or from the main school to the exclusion to the alternative provision. So I think that needs tightening up, and we've made some suggestions around that. And I think it'd be really useful to hear what the executive have got to say, and we've given them 6 months. It's worth saying that the executive had planned a new inclusion strategy, which they're drafting later in the year, and actually quite a lot of these things that we've said need to be picked up in that inclusion strategy, which is why we're suggesting that they go away and work on these things now, rather than another working group get stuck into the same details now. So it might well be in a year's time, when we've seen the exclusion strategy, that there's something that a working group can go back into and look at that point. The final one of the recommendations to pick up on is the very welcome money that the council's put into in this current financial year into improvements into the Latimer alternative provision site, the academy site in Preston Road. It's a very tired building. It's a fabulous old Victorian school, but it's showing its age, and it really isn't up to the modern standard. And I mean, it's amazing what they achieve in there, despite the facilities. And we were very inspired by some of the teachers that we met on our trip round there. But it's definitely a trip back in time going into that building. So the £2 million very worthwhile, and I think it would be well worth this committee hearing a report at the end of the financial year as to how progress with that project has been. Well, it should have been completed. So that is a brief canter through the recommendations. I think I know I'm grateful to Councillor Blakeman for submitting her questions in advance. I think I've addressed question 8 in full in my remarks there. Questions 5 and 6 do relate to this report, but I'll wait for the chair to go back to Councillor Blakeman for those when we get to that stage. Chair, over to you. You're on mute, Janet. Janet, you're on mute.
Hello?
Oh, we can hear you now, Janet, but we can't see you.
Okay, sorry. Can you see me now? No.
No, but we can hear you. So so I'd completed, and I was now waiting for questions, and I'm sure other members of the committee, of the working group, might want to chip in at this point if we get onto any areas of their special interest. So I know there's hands up down the right-hand side, and Robert Atkinson, who's the only camera I can see, has got his physical hand up.
Yeah, 1 second. Okay, can you hear me now? No.
Yes. Yes.
You can hear me. Okay, excellent. Well, first we have to go to committee members, but I would just like to ask a few questions first. I wanted to know, when you were speaking at the various groups, we now need to discuss how to engage with young people. What suggestions would you have going forward for meeting with young people, and in what capacity?
Well, I think the next working group should do the one thing that we would have liked to have done, and I apologise for not coming back to this point in my opening remarks, the one thing we thought we ought to do after our call for evidence to parents and third sector organisations was try and speak to some students who've got some personal experiences of exclusion. And we were on the point of doing that when we ran out of time for the working group because we were right at the end of March, which was the allocated time, but also we then got locked down. So I think the next working group will benefit from hearing from young people who've got the experience of exclusion. But I think the next working group should also go to all 6, or certainly the 5 of the 6 secondary schools that this working group didn't have a chance to do.
Okay, thank you very much. And would you have any lines of inquiry that you suggest when we look at the disparity between the BAME community in terms of the young boys, and what suggestions would you make in terms of how to look into that further?
Well, this is a national problem, and I would be looking to the council executive to work on that over the next few months. They can study the statistics so far only to a certain point, but I want to see what the council executive have got to say. As we've analysed the known national problem and had a look at sorry, I'm just being put off by Judith with her hands up there. Sort of.
We'll get to her, Judith. We'll get to Robert Atkinson after the committee.
It almost looks like a rude gesture that she's making at me, and I was wondering what I'd done to offend her, but it was amusing me anyway. I mean, this is a very serious subject. This disparity with different ethnicities experiencing exclusion at different rates. And the RBKC picture largely mirrors the national picture, except I think the African background, the immediate African heritage students seem to be a bit higher than the national by comparison with the Caribbean, which are in line with national. But I would want the executive to do more work on this over the next 6 months and report back, and then that might well be something that another working group, perhaps the third working group, can pick up as an area of study for the next council year, depending on what the executive have found.
Thank you very much. Now, I know Councillor Nail really wanted to discuss this with you, so I'll call on Councillor Nail for the next question, please.
Thank you. Do I need to declare anything? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Thank you. What I would like to say first, thank you very much for producing this report. I think the efforts went to it really commended, and I agree with a lot of the findings, the key issues in it. And I agree it's actually Black kids being unfairly expelled from school because the teachers just think they are trouble. I think the schools as well have the lack of time and resources and expertise, as you explained. And I agree as well, teachers training is important. I'm sure you agree with that, with the Equality Act 2010, because there is the unbiased prejudice against the Black students. It's important to have support workers. I agree with that as well. So the findings are really very, very helpful, as well as I agree with you that this finding needs more investigation. 3 months weren't long enough to get to results, and the fact that you've managed to visit one school and the need for visiting other 5 schools because they have different exclusion policy. There is just one paragraph I would like to read, a very small paragraph in page 2, secondary schools. That's the last paragraph. It says, the emphasis on schools to attain high academic standards creates additional pressure on those children who may not be best suited to a purely academic pathway. I agree completely with this statement. However, I do think the kids who've been excluded, the issue and the reasons, it's socio-economic issue. It wasn't intellectual. And I think actually these kids who have been excluded, they are intelligent enough. But the fact that schools are not flexible enough, not creative enough to provide for them different kind of things that they will be interested in, it makes it difficult. And the fact that not supported in their whatever social economic issues that they're facing. So support, do you agree with me? Support is important from school itself to have support workers there to help the schools, as they don't have the resources and time now and expertise. So this is my comment actually, but thank you very much for this report.
Thank you, Nadia. You've made a number of good points there, and there's undoubtedly a link between the wards with the most deprived socioeconomic circumstances and the incidence of exclusion. That's proved through the statistics in the report, and I think the vocational pathway, the opportunity for a vocational pathway, and this is a second point, I think is actually really important. It's probably a national gap, but we need to have a look at that locally and see what can be offered, because kids that aren't interested in academics and they're out there might well and do thrive with something more practical, and if they can be offered those opportunities early, then that will hopefully, for those particular cases, keep their attention in school and get them thriving and in the environment.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes. Could I just ask you briefly, when you had high exclusions, weren't some of them repeat students? So that would affect the statistics slightly.
Yes, that is true, that there are, and it depends which table you look at as to whether you've got the, and we've got tables of both, but is it total number of exclusions or total number of students excluded? Because there are individual students who experience multiple cases of exclusion within the figures.
Thank you. That's very important. Shall we call on Councillor Wade, please? You had your hand up.
I'm on the committee. She's not.
She was actually, she was in this working group.
I just wanted to respond to the comment made about the pressure. I think that all of the secondary schools had quite a lot of pressure, high academic standards that they were trying to attain. And I think that that did put a lot of pressure on children and young adults who perhaps were either late starters or just were perhaps more suited to more vocational work. But I think that what came across very clearly was this sometimes this very pressure cooker type of environment, which perhaps if you were suffering from different issues at home were actually exacerbated the problem. So it was a different culture at school so that the school didn't necessarily reflect the culture from the area that they were living in. And that was sometimes the disconnect there. And that's, I think, where some of the parents, when we were talking to them, were saying that they needed help to be able to communicate with the schools, for example, when the problems emerged. So there was one part of the conversation was that schools had a procedure of entering in a pathway for exclusions, which the parents didn't necessarily understand or could actually prevent. And that was another thing that came out. Wouldn't you agree, Greg?
Yes, I don't think I need to add anything more to that. Thank you, Linda.
Yes, thank you, Linda. That was very valuable. Now I see Councillor Blakeman. You would like to ask a question relevant to this report?
Yeah, I'd like to comment as well. I don't understand why we're only allowed to ask questions about reports. We should be allowed to comment on them as well in order to scrutinise properly. One thing I think in relation to the excessive number of BMA boys in particular, and you haven't really touched on in this report, is the effects of parents' mental health on children who get exclusions, and also the effect of overcrowded housing. And I think this is one of the problems of the council having put everything down to silo working. So for the next working group, I would actually like to see somebody from adult health and social care and somebody from the housing select committees on it if at all possible. Secondly,
well, can I come back to you? Shall we take these one at a time,
Okay.
Judith? So
what if I'm allowed
I'm
to
not
ask?
going to say. Well, I hope so. I hope you get a chance to ask all of them. But in terms of the effect on families, I would like to have thought that came out loud and clear. It certainly came out to us that the effect of an exclusion, whether it be a temporary or a permanent, was very profound, not only on the pupils, but also on their families. And we heard that loud and clear from the from some of the parents that came forward to talk to us. And if we haven't made that point strongly enough, I'm sorry, but it is a very important point,
Yeah, no,
and it's one of the reasons, and it's one of the
balance.
reasons why. Well, it's one of the reasons why we think that exclusion should always be a last resort, but it's how can we lower the bar in future to reduce the incidence of temporary or permanent exclusion to minimise the number of families that have to go through this. The housing point, I don't really think I can comment on that because we didn't look at it. But it's a point you've made and we've heard it.
It is pretty significant, yes. After the Grenfell fire, we got a lot of concerns from parents whose children were being excluded from school, and I was surprised at that. But then, when I read your report, I noticed that Kensington Aldridge Academy has by far the highest number of exclusions, and that would explain it. And you do refer to one of the mothers raising the issue about it, which is interesting because it was about 5 fathers who raised the issue with me. So it's obviously more than just anecdotal. And I hope that Kensington Aldridge Academy is going to actually take more notice of this now.
So shall I come back on that whole subject? So that, or were you going to go on to ask something related to it, or was the next one a different point?
No, the next one's about Latimer Academy.
Well, let's go back into that and unpack it, because we asked about the Grenfell effect at every one of our school visits. So that was St Charles's Primary School in Dalgarno, the Chelsea Academy, which has the second highest incidence of exclusion, but it's only just short of KAA, and Latimer, the Alternative Provision Academy. And each one of those said that, in their view, there was not a direct linkage between the Grenfell, those who've been traumatised by the Grenfell disaster, and exclusion. And the statistics that we looked at in a lot of detail don't support that, in that they're saying that the incidence of exclusion amongst the Grenfell cohort is no different from the typical exclusion data. Now, that doesn't mean to say that those students from the Grenfell cohort who have been excluded, and of course there are some, because they are the statistics say they're a typical cohort, therefore some of them have been excluded, that those people have suffered the traumas of exclusion, and that's moved on to their families. So it's a very profound experience for those people, and that is of course on top of the trauma of the Grenfell disaster itself. But statistically, the Grenfell community, the directly affected community, appears to be in line with the rest of the borough.
Yes, I'm sure it is now, but at the time, immediately after the Grenfell fire, and certainly all the fathers who spoke to me seemed to think that their child was misbehaving because of their trauma from the tragedy. So, I mean, I don't want to labour the point, but I do think it needs to be made. The statistics
don't really bear that out. I mean, it might be that there are some of them that have experienced that, and that would be, it may well be that there is a linkage, but statistically, the incidence of exclusion appears to have gone down in the year after, or the second year after Grenfell. So we have looked at the last 3 years. In fact, the length of time people
immediately after the thing that they felt that their children were not being treated with particularly with kid gloves. Sorry, I wanted to go on to the Latimer Academy because your report says that it was tired. We were told that at one stage it had actually been closed because it was positively dangerous, and local residents told us that the children were just left on the streets and they didn't quite know how to deal with them, and I wondered why there's no reference to that in the report. I mean, obviously I welcome the money that's going to be spent on redoing the school, if you like, but I hope that the pupils won't be thrown out onto the street again, but that they will have alternative provisions.
Well, yes, I would hope they wouldn't be thrown out either. But your question is the first I've heard of the allegation that they were thrown out on the street because the building was closed. It didn't come up at all in the time we were visiting them, which was, and it didn't come up in any of the other evidence sessions that we had. As we didn't have I mean, of course, if we'd had Labour on the committee last year, we would have had a Labour member on the working group, and maybe it would have been you, Judith, and you would have been closer to the ground, to the people on the ground in that area, and might have picked that up. But we unfortunately didn't pick that up, and so I can't comment on it, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's interesting, because the then Member of Parliament was given a briefing about the situation, and she was quite shocked by it. Also, the residents living on the Silchester estate in particular raised it with us.
And the Member of Parliament did not pass it on to us, so we did not have any information about that at all, I'm afraid, Judith. Sorry, Chair, back to you if you're calling that.
Yes, I just wanted to say that I have visited the school, and they had some tremendous vocational provision, which I know Councillor Wade was very interested in. And they had some success stories of people who weren't academically inclined, but were learning construction, and were very excited about that. There was another 2 students who were going off to university, and another student who wanted to become a chef. So there are a lot of positive stories coming out of that school, Judith, and we hope you will visit it with us next time, now that you're on the committee.
I have visited in the past.
Thank you very much, Judith. We'll now go along to Councillor Mills, who has a question, and then we will go along to Councillor Atkinson, who has a few questions.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks. Good report. Can you hear me?
I can, yes. Go ahead, Julie.
So the obviously Black Lives Matter and the recent protests have highlighted systemic racism, at least what is perceived as systemic racism towards the BAME community. You've used the term unconscious bias in the report. I find that deeply troubling a term. Did your committee discover that there was prejudice, racism, unconscious bias? Have you articulated it? Because without speaking, and I think it is a fault, without speaking to students themselves who have been excluded, the report is effectively top down. So what did the committee find that it has not put into this report? Did it find unconscious bias amongst teachers and the local authority?
No, it didn't. But then we didn't have long enough to uncover it. But unconscious bias is an obvious point of training that can help to mitigate the problem from if the problem is a top-down one, then unconscious bias training is something that can help to address it. In terms of did we get the perspective from the bottom up? No, we didn't. And you're right, it's a weakness, but 3 months wasn't long enough. The next working group should look at that, should get some personal experiences from the students who've had experience of exclusion. I think that would strengthen the study of it.
Comment that all working groups should start, whether you're dealing with poisoned eggs or anything else, should deal bottom up rather than top down, because otherwise what you're getting is a vanilla, if I could use that term in this context, view of everything. If you're not talking, and obviously, as you know, I work in the criminal justice system, and exclusion is often the first step towards a criminal trajectory. The idea that you should focus on just vocational training is, I think, an insult to the community, because very often it is the fact that opportunities are not presented because there is unconscious bias, to use that term, within the system that doesn't allow them exposure to other opportunities that might be open to other mainstream people. So I think...
So that's why... Sorry, you
I was
haven't
just going
finished.
to say, if we are to advocate in any way for what Black Lives Matter is trying to say to the community at large, to the nation at large, it's saying, look at what you feel, look at how you act, that is you, the individual, and is the systemic racism stemming from there, and therefore are we being cut off from opportunities that the so-called white nations or peoples might themselves be exposed to. So I think as a local authority, in looking at the Grenfell situation, looking at the inequalities, the disparity between the North and South, the health inequalities that have existed for so long, the fact that your report talks to at least 3 wards that are in the most depressed in the country. Now, I think we need to be, it's not just training, it's actually IDing whether this exists within the system, and then taking not just training opportunities, but many other opportunities to address what, as you've just said, is one of the most critical problems that is going to be part of today's, today's experience, 21st century experiences. So more work to do, I think.
Thank you very much. I did mention at the beginning of the meeting that we are taking the issues going on. I don't want to use an expression either way, because we really do want to focus on leveling up through education and opportunity. So I do welcome what you said, Julie, and we are definitely on the same path with you. Thank you very much for your contribution. Now may I call on, are there any other councillors on the committee who would like to speak? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes. I think may say I think the report is an impressive achievement in such a short period, and I agree with Councillor Hammond. It would be helpful to at a future stage to talk to the students, but also to the other secondary schools, and particularly I think Holland Park, which seems to have avoided exclusions in the ways that other academies haven't.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I think on Holland Park, I think there's an important point to make, and that is that the duty on Ofsted has changed in the last couple of years. That they now have a duty to examine exclusions and the illegal practice of off-rolling. And Holland Park is the only one of the borough's schools that's had an Ofsted inspection since that new regime was brought in. And there is a paragraph in the Holland Park Ofsted report which says that they, in Ofsted's view, Holland Park is using exclusions appropriately, and there is no evidence of illegal off-rolling. I think you can make that point in public, but definitely it'd be worthwhile a future working group going to visit Holland Park School.
Thank you.
Thank you for that contribution. I see Councillor Nile, did you want to make another comment or question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just would like to comment. My comment is about, it's true that we live in an equal society, and I think from this working group report, it's very clear when you talk about Black kids that they are overrepresented in school exclusion, that very clear that there is a unconscious bias is there. That's why I think teachers training is very, very important and vital, and to address this issue. The other question I would like to ask, Greg, do you think moving forward, if a group continue to investigate all these issues and find ways of supporting schools and addressing inclusion policy or strategy, do you think we should involve in this committee or the working group parents to be part of it as well? Will that be helpful? The other thing as well about early help and how much information you have about early help and their intervention with the kids who are excluded. And is there any details or statistic about actually after exclusion that these kids manage to go back to school in some cases and succeed, or majority end up like other statistic of kids who couldn't perform, no longer couldn't join school again? And yeah, is it a negative or positive outcome from the early help point of view? Thank you.
Thanks, Nadia. I think taking those points in reverse order, I don't think I've got any statistics that will prove one way or the other the early help, beyond the fact that we thought the early help was very beneficial, and we look forward to seeing what the new inclusion strategy produces in that regard. For having parents on the working group, yes, I actually just want to go back to something that Judith said under the previous item on working groups. It's not an obligation to have non-council members, and I include co-optees in that, on working groups. It's an option, but it's an option that I would certainly welcome. I think having a parent, I know Richard is a governor. I think Richard is actually a parent as well, but he can jump in and correct me on that, because I think Richard's a parent governor. So in that sense, we did have a parent on the on this committee. But I think, as a matter of principle, having a member of the public on a working group is a good thing. And on the first point, the facts that you mentioned that are borne out by statistics, I think we have to be careful with attributing causality to the facts, because we just don't know enough. Unconscious bias may be one of the reasons behind it, and it's certainly something that can be addressed, and that's why we recommended to the council that it's something that should be addressed. But we don't really know that is the problem. And we do need to tackle it in lots of different ways, and that's one way that we know we can tackle it. But it'd be very interesting to see what the council produces in 6 months' time when they report back on recommendation 7.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Are there any other committee meeting members who would like to make a comment?
Can I make a comment?
No.
Who is that?
Stella.
Yes, of course.
Hi.
We're having trouble because there are hands up for 28 people, but it doesn't say who they are. So please speak up since you're on the committee. We really appreciate it.
A comment. I've been hearing about teachers training. Let us acknowledge the hard work that the teachers are doing. The training is good. There's no problem. We should take in consideration that there are a lot of influences outside the school, like the family, the community, the media, the peers. So I think saying that teachers' training should be improved or it's lacking, it's not nice to hear. Being a former teacher, I just felt a bit bad about it.
Well, if I can come back to you, Estella, I think many of the teachers that we met were highly inspiring people across all three of the schools. But as a professional in any walk of life, whether it be medicine or teaching or the military or whatever it is, you can always improve. And I think teachers will welcome extra training in a particular area, particularly if they don't if it's unconscious, as we're suggesting unconscious bias, it's unconscious. It means they don't realise that there's a problem. I don't know that there is a problem, but the training can't do any harm, and it might well be addressing a problem. So we categorically did not say that there is a problem with teachers, but we certainly recommend some training for them to improve their performance professionally, and I think most of them will welcome that.
Okay. Thank you very much. I also would like to add that we have, as a council, we have been very proactive with our youth workers, and I've noticed a lot of the teachers come from BAME backgrounds, and I think that's a very positive thing in our school system. And let us remember that we did get an outstanding report, so that does help. But it is also good what Councillor Hammond pointed out about there might be some underlying biases that people aren't aware of, and that's always good to address, as the whole society now is addressing that. So thank you very much for commenting on that. Now I see that Councillor Woodger would like to mention something.
Hello. Hi.
Hello.
Hi. It's a very good report, pretty thorough. I'm just wondering, in a sort of post-lockdown world, is there anything you would have changed in this report? And do you think the thinking around exclusion might change now? Literally everyone's been excluded from school in a sense. Do you think the lockdown and children obviously being at home has changed anything in terms of the conclusions of this report?
Well, thank you for those questions, Maxwell. I mean, they're two enormous questions. So the second one about lockdown, I just don't think I can address that, because I literally have no idea, and I think we'll have to wait and see what happens in September, when we must hope that everybody's back to normal, was normal, whatever normality is in the future. But I just don't think we're going to be able to tell, and I'm sure the data for this current academic year is going to be completely different from everything else, because we've only had half an academic year. In terms of what I would change, well, we only had 3 months for the report, so the small thing I would change, and it's not small in terms of its importance, but it's small in terms of how easy it is to achieve, is the one that Councillor Mills was highlighted, and that's the need to address this from the bottom up, because we have done top down, and we do need to look at the bottom up perspective, although we did do the parents' perspective, so that's sort of somewhere in the middle perhaps. But I would have liked to have talked to some kids, but who'd had that and bring that experience to us. The thing I would change is, and I think it's a lesson for scrutiny more widely, is that a report like this needs a full council year to do it justice, and you really need to be starting. And we won't be doing that this year, of course, because of lockdown, but we need to be choosing the subjects in May and starting work before the summer holidays and reporting in about April the following year. And a subject like exclusions is one of 2 working groups of size that can be done by a select committee, and it should take a full year. So if we'd had a full year to do it, we would have produced a very different report. But the fact is, I think this is a useful report, because it's situated the subject and produced some areas that we can focus on, and some areas that really don't need focus, that would have had time spent on them otherwise.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'll take one more question from the committee, and then we'll move on to our councillor and representative of the community, Robert Atkinson. Any more committee members have any questions? Okay, Councillor Atkinson, over to you, please.
Thanks very much. I have a question and a couple of comments. The question is on early intervention, and it's the last paragraph of page 21, which says that schools are appreciative of early help, which is my experience as well. But it says that there's been a diminution of attendance by the early help team. And then right at the end, it says that this might be something to do with new requirements for parental consent. Can I have an explanation of that, please?
Thank you, Robert. No, I can't give you an explanation for that, but that's why we really want the council executive to report back in more detail. We had the comment at the bottom of page 21 was brought up in our visit to the Chelsea Academy, and we had the explanation during the report drafting stage, and I think it does need some more. It needs some more unpacking, and that's why we've asked for that recommendation has gone in. So you hold the question for 6 months, and you should get something back from the lead member in 6 months' time.
My comment is about off-rolling and managed moves, because I think the schools that are discriminatory are too clever to push through the exclusions, because that's more carefully measured. And I'm pleased that Ofsted has now taken such a strong line about off-rolling. And I think we commented earlier on that the Aldwych Academy and the Chelsea School at the highest level, but I have heard it said that they are simply more honest in their statistics, in that they go through the process and they do exclude. And I think, as I say, I'm very pleased that off-rolling is now getting attention from Ofsted. And the point on managed moves only ever work with parental support. And my understanding is that doesn't happen as much as it should do. So that's something else I think we might want to take a look at. And if I can sort of come forward with what I see as a solution to quite a lot of this, I do think family support workers in the secondary schools would solve a lot of problems. It'd be a question of acting at an early stage rather than it becoming much more difficult, much more damaging, much more expensive. And my experience in the United States is that family support workers in high schools are greatly valued. Now, they cost money, but it's better to spend money to keep children in schools rather than to chase around afterwards when they've gone. And we all know that once children are taken out of schools, that's when they can get seriously into trouble, and that's when it costs society later on a huge amount of money. So I would hope that we would be looking seriously at family support workers in our secondary schools.
Thank you, Robert. I don't think I need to add anything to that. There was a useful set of comments.
Excellent. So now we will look at the different recommendations and see if we can agree them. Recommendation 1, can we agree this?
Yes.
Yep.
Great.
Excellent. Recommendation 2, can we agree this?
Yes.
Agreed.
Yes.
Recommendation 3, do we agree this?
Agreed.
Yes.
Yes.
Recommendation 4, do we agree this?
Agreed.
Yes.
Recommendation 5, do we agree this?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Recommendation 6, do we agree this?
Yes.
Yes.
And recommendation 7, do we agree this?
Yes, agreed.
Good. I'd like to say thank you very much for an excellent report. I also would like to thank all of the committee members and councillors who asked very good questions and were able to embellish on this report. So we have the select committee is recommended to agree that the report and its recommendations be presented to the lead member for children and families for action. Thank you very much. Thank you to the working group. Thank you to their lead member, Greg Hammond. And we shall now proceed to A7. I'd like to welcome our new lead member for Family and Children's Services, Josh Rendell, and his officers, and also to thank your officers and the council for doing an excellent job during the COVID-19 emergency. People really worked very well together, and my residents have written glowing reports, and they've been very happy. So thank you very much. It's been a very just horrific experience, and you really rose to the occasion. Chair, would you like to introduce item A7?
Sorry, Janet, was that for me?
Yes.
Sorry.
Chair. Lead member, just sorry, it said here in my notes they called you chair. Lead member Josh Rendell, would you please come and inform us of A7 and present your paper?
Thank you, Chairman. And I'd like to thank all members of the committee for having me this evening and presenting this report, which is my first report as lead member for Families and Children's Services. Before I get started, Chair, with your leave, I would just like to commemorate on today, which is the 72nd anniversary of the Windrush generation, who arrived in Tilbury Port in 1948. I'd just like to say thank you to all those members of the community who make our borough especially such a wonderful place, especially with the Notting Hill Carnival and all those wonderful cultural events and community service that great generation and their descendants provide. So I'd just like to thank all members of the Windrush generation today on their day, which is Windrush Day.
Hear, hear.
Thank you again, Chairman. But yeah, so thank you. As members would see and other guests this evening, we presented our first report, which is that of obviously lead member of Families and Children's Services. So we've got a few things we can go to. Of course, one of the biggest details of the past, obviously, few weeks is that of COVID recovery and a COVID return to schools. And of course, we can take questions on this going forward as well. But before we do, just like to then once again thank you to the teachers and the head teachers, the governors, and all the support staff of schools who have worked so hard to get those children who are currently back in school back there, back safely and learning, because of course education is absolutely the main thing that children need. It gives them a sense of safety and obviously improves their life chances going forward. So that's absolutely key. As you can see in the report, we've covered numerous arenas that were set by you, Chair, and the committee. So that includes things such as the Grenfell recovery strategy, such as funding for emotional support, which we can get onto, outcomes for children affected by the Grenfell Tower, of course, also looking at the Grenfell Nursery, which I know Councillor Bateman and Councillor Atkins will no doubt have questions on. Of course, very happy to take those. A coronavirus response, and of course, then what our next steps are for the summer youth provision since EPIC, who were our youth service provider, exited the market earlier at the end of May. But I will take it as the report as read for all members of the committee, and I'm happy to take questions with myself and officers who are present this evening.
Hello?
Hello? I'm ready for questions, Chair.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I dropped we dropped here for a minute. Okay. Who would like to ask the first question from the committee? I see here.
Well,
I
I've
have
got a few.
Judith? Do you have, you said you do? I'm sorry, my chat room has dropped here, so.
Sorry, as requested, I put questions in the chat facility. Under the Educational Support Fund, yes. I have a question about the significant cut to the Latimer Community Arts Therapy Project, which is providing a lot of services, not just at Henry Dickens Court, but also to schools. And I understand the financial situation, but I think that's a very thoughtless cut.
Thank you. No, thank you, Councillor. Yes, absolutely. So on that particular point, I'd like to reiterate that the decision, of course, has not been taken. It's currently out for or will be currently out for consultation on that particular question. I have Sarah Newman and Ian Higgs and other officers here that can answer specifics. So forgive me. I've been in the role for 4 weeks for other members who may not be aware. But yes, so on the provision for the emotional support funding for Grenfell students, in specific relation to LCAT. So the funding is actually being redistributed, which is the proposal. As I said, the decision has not been taken, to provide funding directly to schools. So schools themselves can then provide for their students emotional recovery from Grenfell as they see fit. Of course, those schools themselves may wish to retain LCAT as their prime provider, or they may wish to diversify their portfolio and see what else is currently on the market. This, as far as I'm aware, initial decision, I should say, again, it's not particularly been taken for the LCAT proposal, was floated and mooted back earlier in the year. And for those processes going forward, this is the current proposal. As I said, it's not been taken, but that's kind of the reasoning behind it. That it's not a cut. The funds are just being redistributed from LCAT to schools themselves, who then can retain LCAT if they so desire, through a commission and other means. But that's currently what the position is. I'm not sure if officers have anything to add on that particular instance, but that's currently the thought process for that particular proposal.
Yeah, I have a comment on the Malton Road hub. I wanted to say that I've spoken today to one of the mothers who belongs to a family that's very, very seriously affected by the Grenfell tragedy. And she wanted me to say that she is getting absolutely wonderful support from the social worker at the Malton Road hub. She has 3 children from the ages of 5 downwards, and she is suffering quite significantly. And on
thank you for that comment.
And on the Grenfell Nursery Stay and Play,
yes.
A second site option being considered is the Curve. My concern about that is that the lease on the Curve runs out pretty soon, and I understand there's a big rumour going around North Kensington that the facilities at the Curve will be moved to the Maxilla site. In which case that is not a suitable location for the Stay and Play, because the Children's Community Network have already rejected anything that has anywhere near the Westway motorway.
Yes, thank you. Yes, on that point, on the Grenfell Nursery and Stay and Play, yeah, as you know, and rightly from your question previously in the comment section and the chat section, this is something that has been going on, as you know, for quite a while now, and the community had put for the ILS for that. I know the Curve is a second option. Again, I don't think necessarily it will come to fruition at this stage. I know Councillor and yourself and Councillor Atkins and I and with Councillor Alagi have a call on Wednesday to talk about this further, and of course consult you and get your views and thoughts on this. Again, a decision has not formally made yet. But we've had recently good discussions with the Lancaster West, obviously Resident Association, the Lancaster West Childcare Network, to talk about the site provision of where it really is. We've had 2 pre-applications from the site for the Isles Booker Centre, both of which have been successful, as far as I'm aware, or I should not say successful, but positive from council planners to go into that site. But again, we're going to fully consult on that, not just obviously with the residents in close proximity to it, but wider on the estate as well, which was something that I pushed as the most recent call with relevant stakeholders. But again, as I said, Councillor, we can follow this up on Wednesday a bit further on our separate call. But yeah, absolutely, I kind of get your points with those. I'm not particularly aware of the rumours that you mentioned, but I don't doubt their certainty. But again, I will work with officers and yourselves as ward councillors to get the kind of best possible solution we can for this site.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask a question, please, about emotional and mental health. We have added services for young students regarding emotional and mental health as a result of Grenfell. And now we also have to add that for COVID-19, because there could be very serious emotional and mental health problems, especially as the inconsistency of staying at home, going to school, etc. What programs do you suggest going forward, and what facilities do we have in the schools and the after-school programs for mental health for the children?
Oh, I see.
The counseling, etc.
Oh, I see. Thank you, Chair. Sorry, you dropped out slightly there in the middle.
Yeah, I'm having trouble tonight. Sorry with my connection.
No, that's all right. I'll just reconfirm back to you. You asked what kind of mental health provisions do we have for children in school in light of COVID. Is that right?
With COVID and Grenfell, and there seems to be a very proactive, open discussion now with young people about mental health. So I'd like you to talk to that point, please.
Thank you. I may defer to officers in this particular instance, if I may, Chair, with your leave, about this. But from the top provision, as mentioned, I know mental health, and of course, should be at the top of the agenda for a lot of things. And now, with the push from all sections of society to have mental health as a prime focus, as well as physical health, I think is a really, really wonderful thing. Of course, with the impact of Grenfell Tower fire and the aftermath of that, which we're still obviously being affected by for everyone in the community, and that of COVID itself. There are mental health provisions in place in certain schools, obviously, and especially in the north of the borough. But I may defer to Sarah Newman. Sarah, if you're able to help with the specifics of this, it would be much appreciated.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Yes, so we've been developing a recovery curriculum with our schools so that they can support children who are returning to school with their emotional well-being, their behavioural needs and their social needs, as well as getting back into the learning. But we've also been working with colleagues in the CCG to make sure that there is a really good emotional well-being and mental health offer across the community. Now, I know that Etienne Stein is on the line, and I'm going to pass over to him because he can give you some really good detail on that, because obviously we've been really worried about it and we wanted to ensure that there was a really robust offer in place for children. So Etienne, can I bring you in now?
Thank you, Sarah. I hope everyone can hear me. I think just to say really that the range of support that's available in schools has evolved really. And, there have been a number of initiatives to support pupils with sort of mental health and emotional well-being. So the kind of provision that's available includes things like commissioned services that continue to be delivered. So although we're talking about reinvesting in schools, commissioned services will continue to be delivered from the organisations that currently are funded. There are education psychologist support that's available within schools as well. There's the mental health support teams that's provided via the Trailblazer work that's being done in schools. We have the targeted education support from the Grenfell Dedicated Service, the Grenfell Education funded projects as well. And then one of our key partners, the NHS, has a Grenfell Health and Wellbeing Service. And I think a really good service that the youth sector uses in quite a big way is called Kooth, K-O-O-T-H. It's an online service. It's free and it's used for young people who are experiencing mental health and emotional well-being kind of issues. And it's also used, it's very popular with professionals as well who work with young people. So that's just a range of the support that's currently on offer.
Excellent. And is it also keeping an eye on reports of domestic abuse, which could have happened during COVID-19, during the lockdown, before people went back to school?
Do you want me to jump in here, Councillor Randall?
Yes, that's all right.
Okay, yeah, we've been working closely with the police to monitor the number of reports in relation to domestic abuse. And we also have a violence against women and girls strategy group, who through that group we work closely with voluntary sector services who often provide support to victims of domestic abuse who haven't come forward to the police for reasons of their own, but they connect in through that network and we ensure they're linked up to appropriate services. I can say that the official figures show that there's been about an 8% uplift in domestic abuse reports over the past 12 weeks. And in social care, we haven't yet seen a rise in the referrals relating to children who are witness to domestic abuse.
I see. Well, I'm glad you're on it. I see here we have a couple of comments from Richard Derricky, one of my committee members. Richard, come in, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And hello to Councillor Rendell and welcome to your new post.
Thank you, Richard. Lovely to meet you.
Okay. Just two quick comments, if I may. My first comment is a general point about childcare provision in the borough. And I was particularly struck about a point made in Appendix 1 of A5, and it's in paragraph 4.5. I just read this bit out to you, which the paper notes that the very low number of eligible families that are actually accessing the extended offer for 3 and 4-year-olds. So in spring 2018, we were at 29% compared to the DFE estimate of take-up of around 80%. Now, the paper sets out the marketing work that officers have done to promote the offer, and this has resulted in a modest uptake in places. However, I think the council really needs to go a bit further than this, because the feedback I've had from my early years lead is that the pupils in most need of full-time early years service support haven't been getting it. And as a result, they don't make as much progress as they should. And obviously, we know that the deficit in learning carries through into future years and is very hard to make up. So I'd like to suggest that some further work is undertaken to look at the barriers to accessing the extra support. So, for example, many parents who are unemployed can't get voluntary work to boost their CVs because they have to pick up the children at 11:45. So they're caught in a catch-22 situation. They can't build up their CVs because they haven't got childcare support. Some parents are employed, but they're on too few hours to qualify. And some find the bureaucracy fiddly and very confusing, so miss out. So I'm just wondering whether it might be possible at some point in the future to survey schools to find out what exactly is stopping parents coming forward to claim the extra support and the extra hours. Now, that's important not just in order to support the children who may already be at an educational disadvantage, or just to help parents get back to work, but it's also important to ensure nursery provision across the borough is sustainable.
That's really good points and something I had not appreciated. Again, only been in a month, Richard, but thank you so much for that. I'm happy to take a way to look at that and work with officers to see what we're able to do. Of course, Chair, it may be something that your committee wishes to take up further in due course as well, but that's not for me to decide. But I'm happy to take comments, Richard, and look at those and get back to you if that's all right.
Okay, that's very helpful. My second point was about in your paper 8.3, paragraph 8.3, where you very helpfully set out for us about EPIC and the Harrow Club and Earls Court Youth Club. So that's very, very helpful. Thank you very much indeed. I'm just wondering if you've got any information about Flashpoint and whether you know yet who's going to be running Flashpoint and what kind of provision they will be providing, particularly over the summer months.
Thank you. Yes, and I may thank you, Richard. I may refer to my colleague, my officer, I should say, Etienne, who's on the call, who's working on this vigorously. On Flashpoint specifically, I know that we've been getting a lot of questions, both to myself and through Greg Hands, the MP for Chelsea, who has been forwarded to me, and of course from direct residents such as concerned parents at Ashburn School, etc. Flashpoint, just for the record, is not closing. That's not occurring at all. So that may ease some residents' minds who use the site and some of our children and younger people who do use it. As far as I'm aware, as EPIC exited the market earlier this year, as you know, we're finding alternative providers for the site. I know Earls Court Youth Club have put in some thoughts and process behind to help run the site and help run some activities from their centre, of course, in Redcliffe Ward. But as far as I'm aware right now, a decision hasn't been made specifically on a contractor to take over Flashpoint, but I will let Etienne fill in those details if I've got that correct.
Hi, thank you, Councillor Rendell. So just to say that, just to reiterate the point really, is that there's no plan to close Flashpoint. Services will continue. In the current set of restrictions, community adventure play is not possible to be delivered. So I think that's a really key kind of context for all of this. We are in the process of talking to 3 organisations who previously have expressed an interest. So when EPIC took the decision to wind up, 3 organisations expressed an interest in the provision. So we are in dialogue with those organisations, and the view very much is to start to fund those organisations, or well, we need to apply a process that will be fair and transparent. So that's the first thing to say, is that there will be a small process in place, and those organisations will be invited to submit proposals that we will review, and based on those proposals we will then seek to fund an organisation to take up the Flashpoint provision from around mid-July to late July. So what in the discussions we have had, the organisations will also be doing a lot of consultation and engagement with the community and with the Residents Association to kind of understand the activities they want and the priorities they have. But I do want to just express that, there is a need to manage expectation of residents in all of this, because the services will not be provided on a like-for-like basis. The current guidance only allows for really outdoor with small groups of children and young people. It is the direction at the moment, and as it stands, site provision is very, very specific and limited. So there's some work to do with comms with the residents and with the residents associations when the service is awarded.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Yes, thank you. While we have Etienne on the line, I see there are a couple of questions that Councillor Blakeman and Councillor Atkinson would like to ask about Canal Side. Councillor Blakeman, can you sum up your question so that we can, and then we'll have Councillor Atkinson focus on his question, and we'll go on to Etienne, please, to give you a response.
Well, my concern about Canal Side is that it hasn't gone out to tender or anything. The council seem to have selected a new provider. The offer is going to be extended. It's been to planning pre-application. Planning department have approved it. None of this has been advised to us. And as members of the committee, we should be told about this.
Okay, would Councillor Atkinson like to say his question, and then we'll see what the lead member has to say.
Yes, I mean, it does follow on from what Councillor Blakeman has already said. The councillors, not just in our ward, but also in Dalgarno ward themselves, are concerned that they think that the services that have been provided at on the canal have been very good and are very much valued in the local area. And what the councillors are concerned about is that, for want of a better word, we would want to have an organisation which will continue to offer a service which is attractive to local people. What we're worried about, I think, is gentrification, and that middle class families can always find leisure facilities for their children. And I think what is concerned, if it becomes too expensive, then local families fear that they will be excluded.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rendell, would you like to respond?
Chairman. Yes, and first of all, I'd like to commend both Councillor Healy and Councillor Ali for vigorously following this up, and for other colleagues, my other council colleagues in the north of the borough who have been on the this. Very, very good with me. Very much appreciative of that. And I'd also like to also just pass on my commendation to Baraka and other interested parties on the canal side, and especially in Dalgana Ward, who have been querying the response of the council, especially after Epic had exited the market, as we said. As far as I'm aware, we're reprovisioning for the canal side access. It does require certain specialisms, that is training, insurance, skills, licensing, etc., in order to warrant a further contractual provision. I don't believe we've made a contractual provision yet, as far as I'm aware, and we're still in the process of tendering those. I have spoke with Etienne and other officers on the line about this, because I know it's a very emotive issue, and a very issue that we want to support. Obviously, the local community in North Kensington, especially for access to youth facilities and sports centres. But I'll pass over to Etienne, if you don't mind, who has further details than I do, and he'll be able to answer those specific questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rendell. So just, I think I want to tackle two issues, or just the feedback that councillors have given. So on the canal side and the query around the tendering process, we set up a youth services framework as part of the youth review, and invited specific we invited all organisations across Kensington to join that. So there was a process to join that, and we went to that framework, and the only organisation that could actually deliver the specialism for water sports provision is the organisation that we are currently in dialogue with. So I just want to clarify that this isn't a generic youth club provision that we're going out to tender for. If it was, of course, we would be going to the framework, but it's not. This is a very specific water-based provision that is highly regarded and valued within the community, and there are very few organisations that can actually deliver that specific kind of provision. So that is the reason why the council has gone to a specific organisation to do this. So on the point of being a valued provider, I think I completely agree. And again, the alternative provider we are in discussions with has delivered this in other boroughs, neighbouring boroughs as well. They do have a track record of delivering, and I just wanted to provide assurances that this provision will continue to be for free for young people in the borough. And I'm aware that some organisations have approached the council as well to lobby kind of ideas to basically reshape the site into a more enterprising offer, but this site is for children and young people and for the benefit of those residents, and we want to continue to keep it as a site for children and young people.
Thank you very much. Etienne, can you please tell us what are some of the qualifications, because you have to have safety, DBS, they have to exhibit experience in the field. So what are you looking for, and what are the legal requirements before we can take anyone? Because that is really important.
Yeah, for water sports provision, there are specific requirements around licensing, around insurance, around health and safety provision as well. I mean, for a start, you have to have all the equipment, which, you know, includes kayaks and boats. So it excludes almost all generic youth providers. And there are very few organisations across the borough and certainly across London that actually do this. So we other than Epic, there's only one other provider really in the borough that could do this.
Right, and I would imagine that you have to check that their equipment is safe, they have enough life jackets, etc.
Yeah, so they would need to still go through a process to satisfy sort of due diligence and standards and so on. And of course that will happen. I think what I also want to say is, again, it's just around managing expectations. So the National Youth Agency a few days ago issued further guidance on the restrictions. And as it currently stands, from any building-based provision, it's on a one-to-one basis with the appropriate equipment, and it can be up to 6 young people in a kind of detached outdoor arena. So the provision will not be like for like, and it will be more targeted, and it will look slightly different.
Thank you very much. Do I see a hand up? Councillor Adurian.
Thank you, Chair. Since the start of lockdown, obviously a lot of schools have been providing different types of learning packs, whether online learning or simply books and printed booklets to take home so that children can continue their education at home. But I think inevitably we will have had a significant number of children who will not necessarily have engaged with that content. So I was wondering whether we've been able to collate any data from teachers who will obviously be best placed to know that, how many children overall may not have engaged at all with any learning material over the last couple of months. Obviously, this is going to be a national problem, but it'd be good to know what the local situation is. As a kind of direct follow-on from that, then how will the recovery curriculum help those children? And finally, is there any plan to maybe keep a few settings open, school settings open over the summer holidays that might help the most vulnerable children with some catch-up? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Absolutely. So on those couple of those points, we're working really closely with schools about their provision. And firstly, on the learning point, specifically in relation to IT, I know this issue has come out separately as well from other councillors as well, so I thought I'd just flag it here while I have the chance. So I know some bands have been unable to access perhaps IT provisions in order to allow them to learn. Of course, it's down to the schools themselves to provide those particular instances, but the council has provided 30 particular laptops and or iPads to students who are in most need of those in order to get them to learn as most as possible. I'll let Ian or others perhaps answer the specific point about how many students may not be learning in the schools themselves. But in relation to COVID, we keep track of students and teachers who may be in danger of the illness. We have a tracker that kind of keeps us informed as a local authority, both in maintained schools and both in independent or private schools, of those students or teachers who may be ill. We do get an update of that basically daily, just to see who's around, so we can ensure that those students who are still going to school can still learn, especially those students who are in need of safeguarding or going to a place where they can ensure that they do feel safe and they can flag any concerns that they may have. In terms of summer opening provisions, first of all, I welcome the government's decision to include free school meals over the summer. I know this school year has been disrupted, and this has been a challenge for students all across, obviously, the country, England especially, of which the DfE is responsible for. And so that's a good thing to try and obviously encourage our students to stay at school and retain at school. But I'll leave it to Ian or Sarah to answer those specific other points.
It's Ian here. I was just checking if Sarah wanted to say a few words first, whether she'd like me to come in.
Go on, you go for it, Ian.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. Good evening, everyone. Ian Hicks, Director of Education. A couple of things to say. We don't have exact numbers of children who we understand from schools have fallen behind, but I think we do have a shared concern and a shared focus on making sure that we do know who those children are. And as they start to return to school, for those pupils that are eligible and those numbers are increasing, we're starting with teachers to support that assessment work to understand what catch-up needs to take place. Really welcome news, but very new news. The £1 billion of additional investments that's coming in to support children who've fallen behind. We know that £350 million of that £1 billion will be spent on one-to-one tuition, probably online tuition, for disadvantaged students, and that will support them potentially as early as this term in the summer, but definitely over the next academic year. And in addition, the other sum of money, the 650 million, is for schools to bid for themselves. It's hopefully going to be a light touch process through the Education Endowment Foundation. There'll be the government's advice, and we await more detailed guidance. We've written to schools today to say there's more to come. That the guidance does suggest that small group tuition may be one way in which students can be supported to catch up, but the funding is also available for summer schools and for other activities. In advance of the government's announcement, Kensington and Chelsea has agreed to fund play providers such as Fit for Sport and Venture to deliver provision initially for a 2-week period on school sites and also at play sites, so that there is provision for vulnerable families, but also so that teachers, head teachers, can actually get a bit of a break over the summer as well, because I have to acknowledge in my role as Director of Education how incredibly hard they've been working to support both online learning and to support provision for children on site.
Thank you very much. I see Councillor Wade would like to come in.
I was just wondering whether or not there'd been spot welfare checks on children that might not have been necessarily considered to be vulnerable, because we knew who the vulnerable children were before lockdown, but lockdown has generated a different set of circumstances and different sets of pressures.
Thank you, Councillor Wade. Yes, on that point, I know that we have been working really hard to look out and safeguarding children as much as possible. And as you rightly mentioned, the ones that we are aware of, the ones that we know are vulnerable, we do check up, and we do check up now digitally. This has had more success and more engagement with children who check with digitally via WhatsApp and other means, because of course children these days are more IT attuned than perhaps other generations were. In terms of those considered not vulnerable, I'm not exactly sure specifically on that point, but Sarah, you may be able to know or be able to help those fill in those details.
It was merely because if you have families that you know are living in, say, overcrowded conditions.
Yes.
Or have additional family circumstances, which during lockdown may have generated additional tensions, and therefore different set of problems.
We do get through weekly if it's reported through the police, that is, we do get our weekly crime statistics, especially through either domestic abuse or through sexual abuse, and we do get those, as I said, every week, to monitor those situations and obviously flag with those families that we may think are a concern. But on specifics for those not considered vulnerable, Sarah, I don't know if you want to come in here.
Sure. I think it's a really good question and something that we've been very concerned about. Clearly, all of those children and families who were known to Children's Social Care, we've been supporting them all the way through this. But those children who weren't known to us, how are we going to reach them? So what we've been doing is we've been running a public awareness campaign, really targeting neighbours and extended families and families themselves to make contact with us if they're concerned and they need additional support. Of course, schools have been in touch with all of their vulnerable children and where they're concerned about a child who they know isn't receiving support from Children's Social Care, they will be in touch with us. So, we've been encouraging children to return to school so that children become more visible to us. And of course, our duty service has remained open so that if anyone has got concerns about a child, they can report them into Children's Services and we will follow up as appropriate.
Thank you very much. Richard Derrick, your hand is up.
No, it's fine, Chair. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Anyone else hand up? Anyone on the committee would like to speak, or any further councillor questions?
If I may, Chairman, I had sent some questions earlier. I don't know, relating to the budgets. I don't know if this is the right time to raise it with the cabinet member and the officers, or if that will come later on.
Well, you can try it and let's see.
Well, I think. I'm sorry, I don't know if you got hold of them, Councillor Josh. It's basically a whole bunch of budget questions, but I think in the light of COVID and all the extra grants that have been given allegedly by the government,
yes,
it would be helpful to revisit, or for officers to revisit and supply to both the scrutiny committee and indeed the other one, the sort of overarching one,
yes,
how the budgets have and will be impacted.
Yes. Really good questions, and I think this your detailed questions, Councillor, highlights obviously the kind of good thing about both scrutiny and accountability in this instance. And those questions are very detailed for members of the committee who haven't seen the questions or who are guests of the committee this evening. Councillor Mills went through a series of 10 questions about the budget, especially regarding families and children's services and how that is impacted by the government's £1 billion package, and how consequences are going to be affected by both the Black Lives Matter. On the specific, and I'll let officers come in a second, but we're detailed guidance from the DfE on how the £1 billion will be spent. So we still don't really know how that's going to work from a local authority level. But that there is a focus on small tuition fees and the upcoming academic year for children who have fallen behind. What we're going to do is, I'm sorry for the feedback, everyone. I'm going to get back to you, Councillor, with a more detailed written response in due course. Again, once the details come out in further detail. But that's where we're still working out the details. But very good question so far.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rossi would like to make a comment. Please come in.
Answer Julie's question. The OSC has a budget working group. We were meant to start work in April, but that has been delayed, and we're going to meet shortly. So we will be looking at all the, the problems that COVID is going to cause to the budget going forward. But I think also the individual committees will probably want to look at their own budget to see where they are. Okay.
That's fine, and I mean obviously it's the impact. It's all of those extra grants that are coming in, and it would be useful to see how they're going to be sorted out. I suppose my prime concern always in these matters, especially when we look at some of the Grenfell historic matters, is how much of it goes to the local authority. In other words, the online costs, Josh, which I think are in the questions, and how much of it goes directly to the schools and the families. And my concern and my urging to officers and indeed to the cabinet member and the administration would be that as much of this government money as comes in should go to the impacted families and go towards alleviating in terms of their IT needs or their health and well-being needs, that it should go to the families and not to the bureaucracy, if I could use a slightly loaded term.
Yes, fair enough comments, Councillor. Yes, absolutely. As I said, I'll get back to you in writing once the government guidelines have come out on how we can actually spend the money. But if Councillor, would it be okay if I share the questions with the answers with yourself and that of the chair of the OSC?
Yeah, my apologies for not circulating the questions. That was just to save the committee having to go through all those questions. Of course, I mean, it was meant to be for the committee and be for the chairman to circulate it, and in fact for scrutiny officers to circulate it in due course. I apologise for that.
No problem. No, that's fine. I'll get back to everyone on writing.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Okay, is my mic on now?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Well, I thought that was very productive. Clearly, you can see your portfolio is massive, Josh, and we look forward to working with you. You really inspired us.
And as I mentioned earlier, Chairman, I mean, thank you again, because, you know, I think, obviously, as I mentioned to Councillor Mills, the scrutiny and accountability in this instance is really, really prime. And for this committee and all members, both from all parties and those co-opted on as well, it's you know, really needed to ensure, you know, the boat stays on the water, and you know, and everything like that. So yeah, thank you again for having me this evening.
Thank you. I think we'll move along to A8, the work program, which is a very good way to follow from what we've just discussed. There have been many challenges this year, including obviously COVID-19, which really affected our work program. We now have to decide, basically, if we would like to reinstate our youth crime group, or we can decide in September, and I would like to engage with you on the different subjects that you would like to discuss, because we can probably manage, they say 2, we like to do 3 working groups, but there are different ways in order to engage with the public and to engage among ourselves and with the officers, because this is one format. We started at the town hall. Now we're here. We talked about earlier, I discussed with the officers, perhaps we might be able to do a Zoom meeting where we can break out into groups and get the public involved. So there are many, many possibilities, because we don't have to grind to a halt just because of this dreaded virus. And we have shown that we were able to do a committee meeting tonight and to have some excellent reports and engagement with our new lead member and also with the officers. So I think this is a very positive thing. Another point to mention is that we have the focus for our new year's program. We have to include, and I want to include always, Grenfell recovery. We can include COVID-19 in every topic, how we worked with producing services to our families, and going forward, how we can improve. And we also have discussed the racial issues and how we can become more aware, involve that in our schools, involve that in our overall mentality, and work together to create an equal provision for all young people in our borough, and hope to give everyone an equal opportunity, a chance to level up and to progress in life. And that is our goal. And I think it's a very good philosophy to have. I'd like to hear your feelings, whether you would like to reinstate the youth crime, or would you like to put it on the list to discuss it in September? So could people bring that up? I'd like members of the committee to please make a statement on that.
Well, I'm very happy to make a statement if I'm first in the queue.
Please do.
I think it should be reinstated. I think prior to COVID, the amount of gangs, relationship with gangs, the historic position the council had prior to the new intake, that there were no gangs in Kensington and Chelsea. I think all that needs to be revisited. with the knife crime, and I think it's very tied in with the racial issues that you have been discussing or that you made reference to, because if there are issues relating to inequalities and lack of opportunity that lead young people into this kind of crime, then perhaps we could wrap it all up as part of, it could be included also in that. So if the committee is minded to, and officers are happy to, I think it is a very useful topic.
Well, I agree with you, and we also have some very talented co-opted members who have been involved in with working with youth. So it'd be very helpful. I agree with you. It should be reinstated. Would anyone else like to speak to that?
May I speak?
Yes. Who is that?
It's Father Sam.
Oh, yes, please, Father Sam. I see you as a number on here.
Yes, I'm dialing in, I'm afraid, because Teams doesn't work on my computer. Yes, just to also speak to that and say that I think it should be reinstated. It's an issue that is not reducing at the moment in time, and it's also an issue that greatly disproportionately affects the young men in our area. And so I think we should definitely continue with that to see what we can do to support and help them in that situation.
Yes. Would anyone else like to make a comment? And the youth crime, it really involves, there's an overlap to all of any of the other groups, I think. So it's very, very important. So can we agree that we would like to reinstate the youth crime working group?
Yes. Yes, agreed.
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 Excellent.
Agreed.
Now, and as far as the rest of the working program, I would like to keep the communication open. You can make some suggestions here. It will be agreed in the autumn. You can also write to me on specific working groups if you like. Send me some emails, tell me which working groups you would be interested in joining and or leading. We can also continue, one possibility is to continue the exclusions working group. And that's a very important one, especially since we raised many issues that are important to us. And it does definitely need some exploration regarding the BAME community. And that, of course, would lend itself to what we can do positively to help improve the situation for the BAME community. So that is a possibility. If I will put that on our list. And are there any other suggestions? With Grenfell recovery, we can carry on monitoring what's happening with the early childhood provision. But I think it's very important also that we carry on monitoring the emotional and mental health of the Grenfell survivors, and see what other provision can be provided or is being provided that we can scrutinize, and I'll put that on the list as a suggestion. Who else would like to make a suggestion? Councillor Nell? I have your hand up and it says here you'd like to speak.
Yeah, that's before in youth services, but it's fine. My comment will be, I will agree with you that for the exclusion working group to carry on, there is more work to do in that area to be covered, and progress can happen actually if we investigate more the issue of exclusion, and and we can make progress and support schools as well.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Anyone else like to share?
Yes, please. If nobody else would has a comment, I'm conscious I've spoken before.
That's quite all right. We welcome your comments, Councillor Mills.
In which case, it's really a reference back to both Judith's and also Hamish's paper, that there seems to be at least a perception that communications are not working well. I know that, and I just wonder if we shouldn't revisit or officers to provide, could need be a working group, but a working paper on what kinds of communications are going through at strategic level when we find that ward councillors and residents, especially when it comes to procurement or commissioning or delivery or provision, are not being informed or are not included. And I think that's been a bone of contention for some time. And I think it needs to either be a grain within all the papers, or it needs to be specifically looked at so we can improve on that.
I think you make a very good point, as did Councillor Blakeman. And maybe, considering we would like more community support, and it is very difficult. People are busy, they don't have childcare. That's why I was thinking that maybe we will take it online as one possibility. I had thought of also a conference on youth crime, or we can do it online in a Zoom conference. And I think we could probably get quite a few young people involved. And the reason I like Zoom for that is because you can take a lot of people, break them off into chat rooms, then come back in. And it's almost the way the council runs their conferences, their live conferences. So it's just a suggestion. And I'm also interested in other ways, because clearly it is difficult. We've tried engaging by Twitter, we've tried email, we've tried all kinds of things. But maybe we have to get with the program, and the program now is using online facilities. It just makes it easier, perhaps, for people. So any thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's a much more fundamental problem. And I mean, I may be a lone voice in this, in which case, everybody jump on me and tell me to shut up. But I think that there is a mistrust, a continuing mistrust since Grenfell between the community, especially in North Kensington, bearing in mind that my ward is in North Kensington, I represent. And therefore the communications may not be about facilitating, as in whether it's online or otherwise. It may just be to do with a rebuilding, a proper substantive fundamental rebuilding of trust between the council, its officers and its residents. And it's how we structure that and this business of it being bottom up, not top down, that I think really still needs, unfortunately, to be looked at.
Right. Can you make any suggestions?
Sorry, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, the number of times I've tried to encourage people to engage with the council and they've said there's no point.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
I think it's a very good point from Councillor Mills with regard to communication with councillors as well. Councillors need to be updated and have information with regard to any issue in their words. I think that's important.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes. I have seen that
we've got the Charter for Public Participation, which we just seem to have put on the shelf and ignored. I think we need to sort of dust that down and start using it.
Well, we have to, again, Judith, we also have to realize we now are into distancing, and we're not allowed to have the same kind of meetings that we had before. I attended a meeting at the Curve and at the Tabernacle, and they were all packed. So when we get back to that, that would be great, because I know we can communicate with the community. And it's just a question of being able to do that and get back into the community, because we have made strides. I don't look at it as all negative. But in the meantime, perhaps we will be able to engage virtually, and we'll see what else we can do. But thank you for bringing up the point, and I believe the whole committee will agree that we are committed to improving the communication. Can we agree on that? Committee?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes? Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any other urgent matters that people, members or officers wish to raise?
Is anyone going to answer my question about the minutes of the last meeting?
Your question about the, yes, you can phrase it now, actually, because I said to you to bring it up at the end. So please bring it up, and I know that our lead member will have one of his officers answer it. We're ready for you. Can you bring up your question again, please?
Yes, it was on page 6 of the minutes, and it refers to the annual report of the Safeguarding Board, and it says that further analysis would be required to explain the increase in the number of unexpected deaths. And all I wanted was a report back as to whether or not there is going to be a further analysis of this.
Councillor Rendell, can you come in here, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I believe Glenn is on the line. As you know, this was preceding my time, Chairman, who we are about to answer Councillor Blakeman's question.
Thank you very much.
Yes, certainly. Good evening, committee. It's Glenn Peacher, Director of Family Services. Just to remind the committee that the report that was presented back in December was a Tri-Borough report presented by the Tri-Borough project manager for the LSCB, as it was then, and there was a question from a member of the public who raised a question in relation to the rise in unexpected child deaths, and this was particularly in the cohort of children 10 and above. Health provide us with analysis on each unexpected child death. I think that the important thing for this committee to note is that none of the children, RBKC children, met the criteria for a serious case review. And the Child Death Review team are planning to provide their annual report to us by the end of this summer.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions that people would like to make?
Well, the question is for Mr. Page. Have there been an unusual number of deaths, whether or not they warrant a serious case review? Because that is a matter of concern. So would we know what they are? Are they cot deaths? Are they related to gang crime? Are they murders? What are they? What we're being told is that they didn't warrant a serious case review, so therefore they shouldn't. There's no need to scrutinise them, is what I'm taking away from this. I think the committee needs to have a bit more information, and certainly Councillor Blakeman would probably want that too.
Yes, in essence, the majority of deaths, as I understand it, in the report that was presented related to deaths in the year 1819. And the vast majority of those deaths were health-related deaths. As I say, the statistics that were given were on children, not just RBKC children. They were across all 3 boroughs, and there was a total of 14 unexpected child deaths. And in relation to what you're saying, the themes are going to be reported by the Child Death and Review team later this summer.
So are you saying that the increase in unexpected deaths has ceased and that there is not an increase any longer?
As far as I'm aware, there isn't an increase. No, not for RBKC children.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Perhaps when you get that report in the summer, you could forward a copy to our committee. That would be really helpful.
Will do.
Thank you very much. Are there any other queries or comments? Okay, I will be in touch regarding the work program. If you have any ideas, please send them to me, and we will formulate a very productive working program going forward, and hopefully we won't have any setbacks on the next year. And I thank our working groups. They've been fantastic, our committee, our co-optees. Everybody's worked very well, and I'm blessed with a wonderful committee. The officers are really helpful, and I look forward to working with our new lead member. So thank you very much, and good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks very much. Good night.
Thank you. Bye.